I'm Liam, 34 male. I live in a small city where everyone knows everyone, a place where your family name can be a key or a cage. For the last 10 years, I've been a chef and until recently the proud owner of a restaurant called The Hearth. My life was built around two things, my passion for food and my love for my wife, Chloe. The story I'm about to tell you is about how the family I married into, led by a man the entire city looked up to, systematically destroyed one of those things to protect their own secrets, nearly costing me the other. It's a story about how public perception is a weapon and how I had to lose everything to find the truth and ultimately myself. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. My dream wasn't complicated. I wanted to create a space where people felt at home, where the food told a story of local heritage and simple, honest ingredients. The Hearth was that dream made real. It was a cozy 50-seat restaurant in a restored brick building downtown with an open kitchen and a wood-fired oven that was, quite literally, the heart of the place. I poured every cent I had and a good portion of my soul into its walls. For 5 years, it was a success. We were booked out weeks in advance, featured in regional magazines, and became a beloved part of the community. It was hard work, the kind that leaves your bones aching and your mind buzzing, but it was fulfilling. Every clean plate that came back to the kitchen, every smiling face I saw through the pass, was a confirmation that I was doing what I was meant to do. Chloe was there from the beginning. We met in college, and she was the one who encouraged me to leave a stable but soulless corporate kitchen job to chase my own vision. Her background in marketing was invaluable. She designed our logo, managed our social media, and charmed every journalist who walked through our doors. We were a team in life and in business. When I proposed, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. Marrying her also meant marrying into the Vance family, which, in our city, was like being knighted. Her father, Arthur Vance, was a titan. He was a second-generation real estate developer who had shaped half the city's skyline. He sat on the city council, chaired the annual charity gala, and had his face plastered on benches and billboards every election cycle. He was handsome, charismatic, and projected an aura of unimpeachable integrity. To the public, he was a patriarch in the classic sense, strong, decisive, and dedicated to his family and his community. When he shook your hand, his grip was firm, his eyes locked on yours, and you felt like you were the only person in the world. He approved of me, or so I thought. He called me a man of conviction and often brought potential business partners to the Hearth, showing it off as if it were one of his own successful developments. He loved the image of a son-in-law who was a salt-of-the-earth, self-made man. It complemented his own narrative. His son, Chloe's brother Caleb, was a different story. Where Arthur was classic charm, Caleb was modern slickness. He was an investment advisor who wore suits that cost more than my first car and spoke in a rapid-fire cadence of market trends and portfolios. He always seemed to be chasing the next big thing, the high-risk, high-reward venture that would rocket him out of his father's considerable shadow. There was a nervous energy about him, a desperation to prove himself that manifested as overconfidence. He'd often talk down to me about my little restaurant, half-jokingly suggesting I should diversify my assets or leverage my brand. I'd just smile and nod. We were worlds apart. I built things with my hands, he built them with other people's money. The trouble started subtly. A new fine dining restaurant, part of a national chain, opened a few blocks away. Then a popular bistro on the other side of town expanded, doubling their seating. The market was getting saturated. Our bookings, once a solid wall of reservations, started showing a few cracks. It was a normal business challenge, the kind every restaurant owner faces. I wasn't panicked, I was focused. I started planning new menus, a loyalty program, special tasting events, all the standard moves to reinvigorate interest. To do that, I needed a small infusion of capital for marketing and some minor renovations. I went to the bank first, but they were hesitant, citing the increased competition. It was frustrating, but not a deal-breaker. That's when Arthur stepped in. During one of our Sunday family dinners, he put his hand on my shoulder. "Liam, my boy," he said, his voice full of paternal warmth. "I hear you're looking to make some improvements. Don't go begging the banks. The family should be the first port of call." He offered me a personal loan. It was generous, far more than I needed, with incredibly favorable terms. "Think of it as an investment in the family," he'd said, beaming at Chloe. Chloe was thrilled. "See," she whispered to me later that night, "he really does love you, he believes in you." I felt a surge of gratitude and relief. The man I respected, the patriarch of the city, was in my corner. He wasn't just my father-in-law, he was my patron. At the same dinner, I remember Caleb talking excitedly about a new tech startup he was investing in, some company developing an app that was supposed to revolutionize the gig economy. He was animated, sketching graphs on a napkin for his father. Arthur listened, a small, proud smile on his face, but his eyes were distant. He just nodded and said, "As long as you've done your due diligence, son." The conversation moved on, but I registered the moment. It was the first time I realized how much Caleb craved his father's approval, and how Arthur's validation was a currency he dispensed with careful precision. I took the loan. It felt like the smart, safe thing to do. It was a Vance investment, and in this city, the Vances didn't back losers. With the money, I upgraded the kitchen, refreshed the dining room decor, and launched a new marketing campaign designed by Chloe. For a few months, it worked. Business ticked up, and a wave of positive reviews came in. I felt secure, confident that we had weathered the storm. I was so focused on the heat of the ovens and the creation of beautiful food that I didn't see the other, far more dangerous storm gathering on the horizon. I was a chef, a creator. I knew how to build a dish, a menu, a restaurant. I had no idea how to navigate the complex world of family politics, hidden debts, and the crushing weight of a powerful man's reputation. I was a lamb, gratefully accepting help from the wolf who was already planning the slaughter. The dream on a plate was still warm, but it was about to be snatched away. The decline wasn't a sudden crash, it was a slow, sickening slide. Despite the initial boost from the loan, the numbers started to dip again, this time more stubbornly. Regular customers became less regular. Reservations became easier to get. The buzz that had once surrounded the hearth faded to a murmur. I worked harder than ever, putting in 18-hour days, experimenting with dishes until my palate was numb, trying to create something so irresistible it would pull people back in. But it felt like pushing a boulder uphill. The city's dining scene had changed, tastes were shifting. The new, flashy places had momentum. My cozy, heartfelt restaurant was starting to feel old. The financial pressure mounted. I was making enough to cover payroll and suppliers, but the loan payment to Arthur was a constant weight. It was a friendly loan, but it was still a debt. Chloe, seeing the stress etched on my face, tried to help. She launched new social media pushes and tried to set up collaborations, but her efforts felt strained. The easy synergy we once had was replaced by a tense, desperate energy. We started arguing about small things: the cost of ingredients, the font on a new menu, the hours I was working. The restaurant, once our shared dream, was becoming a wedge between us. The breaking point came on a Tuesday night in October. I was staring at a half-empty dining room, the quiet hum of conversation a poor substitute for the lively roar I was used to. My phone buzzed. It was a notification from the local newspaper's website. The headline was a punch to the gut: "Downtown culinary gem the hearth to close its doors." My blood ran cold. It wasn't true. We were struggling, but I had never, not for a second, considered closing. I read the article, my hands shaking. It was short, citing anonymous sources close to the owner who claimed the restaurant was financially insolvent and that an announcement was imminent. It painted a picture of a failing business, a sinking ship. Within minutes, my phone started ringing. My sous chef, my suppliers, even a few regular customers. The news was spreading like wildfire. Chloe rushed into the kitchen, her face pale, holding her own phone. "Liam, what is this? Did you talk to someone?" "Of course not, it's a lie," I snapped, my voice raw with panic. "Someone is trying to kill us." The next day was a nightmare. We had a flood of cancellations. The staff was spooked, asking me if they should be looking for new jobs. I issued a statement denying the report, calling it malicious and untrue, but the damage was done. The rumor was out there, and in the restaurant business, perception is reality. Who wants to book a table at a place that's supposedly about to go under? The article had taken our struggle and turned it into a death sentence. 2 weeks later, the lie became the truth. With revenue plummeting and credit lines drying up, I couldn't make payroll. I had a heartbreaking meeting with my staff, the amazing team who had been with me for years, and told them I had to let them go. Then I called Arthur to tell him I couldn't make my next loan payment. I had to officially close the hearth. The phone call was strange. Arthur wasn't angry. He was sympathetic, almost mournfully so. "I'm so sorry to hear that, Liam," he said, his voice smooth as silk. "You fought the good fight. Sometimes that's all a man can do. Don't worry about the money for now. We'll sort it out." The sorting it out happened a week later at the annual City Foundation Gala, the biggest charity event of the year, chaired, of course, by Arthur Vance. It was a glittering affair held in the ballroom of a hotel Arthur's company had built. I didn't want to go, but Chloe insisted. "We have to show our faces," she said. "We have to show people we're not broken." So I put on my suit, which felt like a costume, and walked into a room full of the city's elite. The whispers followed me like a shadow. I could feel the pitying glances, the "oh, that's him" murmurs. It was excruciating. The climax of the evening was Arthur's keynote speech. He stood at the podium, a picture of grace and authority, and spoke about community, resilience, and the importance of supporting one another in times of hardship. And then he looked out into the crowd, his eyes seeming to find mine. As many of you know, he began, his voice dropping into a somber, intimate tone, my own family has recently faced a difficult situation. My son-in-law, Liam, a young man of great passion and talent, had to close his wonderful restaurant, The Hearth. A hush fell over the room. I felt Chloe's hand tighten on my arm. He poured his heart into that place, Arthur continued, and we were all so proud of him. But passion, unfortunately, is not always enough to weather the storms of the business world. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. It has been a painful lesson for our family, a lesson about the importance of stability, of sound judgment. In these uncertain times, emotional decisions and a certain instability can lead to ruin. We supported him, of course, as family does. But in the end, you cannot protect someone from themselves. The room was silent. He hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't used a single accusatory word, but the message was brutally clear. I was the unstable one. I was the emotional, reckless artist who couldn't handle the real world. I was the failure. He was the wise, supportive patriarch who had done all he could for his wayward son-in-law. He had taken my private, painful failure and served it up as a public morality tale with me as the villain. He was absolving himself, and by extension his family's investment, of any association with the stink of failure. I felt the blood drain from my face. 200 pairs of eyes were on me, filled with a mixture of pity and judgment. He was using my ruin to burnish his own image as a compassionate but wise leader. The shame was a physical force pressing down on my chest, stealing the air from my lungs. I looked at Chloe. Tears were streaming down her face, but she was frozen, staring at her father. I looked over at Caleb, standing near the stage. He was looking at his father with an expression of pure, unadulterated adoration. He was safe. His father had protected him. I stood up and walked out of the ballroom, leaving my wife behind. As the doors closed behind me, I could hear the sound of applause. They were clapping for Arthur Vance, the community leader, the pillar of strength, and in that moment I knew two things with absolute certainty. First, the article that killed my restaurant had not been random. Second, my failure was not my own. It had been engineered, orchestrated, and now publicly announced by the man I had once admired most in the world. He hadn't just let me fail. He had pushed me off the cliff and then given a beautiful eulogy at my funeral. The days after the gala were a gray, featureless fog. I moved through my empty house like a ghost. The hearth was gone, its windows papered over, a for lease sign already hanging in the front. My reputation in the small world of our city was shattered. I was no longer Liam the passionate chef, I was Liam the unstable failure, the cautionary tale Arthur Vance had so eloquently crafted. Friends stopped calling, unsure of what to say. The silence was deafening. Chloe and I barely spoke. She was caught in an impossible position, torn between the husband she loved and the father she idolized. She'd try to comfort me, saying things like, "Dad didn't mean it that way," or "He was just trying to explain it to people." But her words were hollow. We both knew exactly what he had meant. She was defending the indefensible, and the strain was breaking us apart. She was staying late at her marketing job, and when she was home, she was distant, lost in her phone. It felt like she was receding from me, pulled back into the powerful, gravitational field of her family. The shame Arthur had branded me with was paralyzing. I replayed his speech in my head 1,000 times. Instability, emotional decisions, you cannot protect someone from themselves. He had so skillfully woven a narrative that made my failure a personal, psychological flaw. It was genius in a cruel, destructive way. It wasn't just about business. He had attacked my character, my very identity. For weeks, I almost believed him. I questioned every decision I had ever made, every risk I had taken. Maybe he was right. Maybe I was just a dreamer who wasn't built for the real world. The fog began to lift on a rainy Tuesday morning. I was in my home office, sorting through a mountain of paperwork from the restaurant, old invoices, supplier contracts, bank statements. It was a painful task, like sifting through the wreckage of a burned-out home. I was just trying to get my financials in order for the bankruptcy proceedings. That's when I found it. It was a folder labeled Vance Capital, which was where I kept the paperwork for Arthur's loan. Tucked inside was a smaller, separate folder I didn't recognize. It just had one word on it: Caleb. Curiosity piqued, I opened it. Inside were printouts of emails between Chloe and Caleb from about 8 months ago, right around the time I was starting to feel the financial squeeze. I frowned, wondering why Chloe would have printed them and put them in a business folder. The emails were about marketing strategy, but the tone was odd. Caleb was being unusually helpful, offering my wife hot tips on investment opportunities. He was pushing her to convince me to invest the restaurant's small cash reserve into a series of highly speculative ventures. "This is a sure thing, Chloe," one email read. "Tell Liam to get in now. The returns will be massive, enough to fund that expansion he wants and then some." I remembered Chloe mentioning these opportunities to me. I had dismissed them out of hand. The restaurant's cash reserve was sacred. It was our emergency fund, our safety net. I wasn't a gambler. We're a restaurant, not a hedge fund, I had told her. She had been disappointed and we'd had a small argument about it. I had forgotten all about it until now. As I dug deeper into the folder, my unease grew. There were more emails, and then I found a document that made my stomach clench. It was a detailed investment prospectus for a tech startup called Synapse Dynamics. The same company Caleb had been excitedly sketching graphs for at that family dinner months ago. He had apparently sent it to Chloe to show me. I scanned the document. It was full of buzzwords and hockey stick projection charts, promising to disrupt the global logistics industry. On its own, it was just another example of Caleb's high-risk loving nature. But then I started cross-referencing dates. The big push from Caleb for me to invest happened in February. The anonymous restaurant-killing news article was published in early October. The gala where Arthur publicly shamed me was in late October. It felt disconnected, but a sliver of suspicion had lodged itself in my mind. I spent the next few days hunched over my laptop, fueled by black coffee and a growing sense of dread. I wasn't a financial expert, but I was meticulous. I started looking into Synapse Dynamics. It didn't take long to find the cracks. The company had burned through its initial capital with almost no product to show for it. Tech blogs and investor forums were full of whispers about mismanagement and delayed launches. It was a dud. My heart pounded as I kept digging. Who were the other major investors? Most were venture capital firms, but then I found it buried in a public filing document, a holding company named Vance Properties. It wasn't just Caleb, Arthur was in on it too, and their investment wasn't small. They had poured a substantial amount of capital into this failing startup. The pieces started to click into place, forming a horrifying picture. Caleb, desperate to prove himself, had convinced his powerful father to back this sure thing. When it started to go south, they were facing a massive loss. A loss that, if it became public, would not only be a financial disaster but also a major embarrassment for Arthur Vance, the man whose reputation was built on shrewd, successful investments and sound judgment. I pulled up the bank statements for the Hearth, specifically for the months leading up to the closure. I stared at the numbers, the weekly revenues, the supplier costs. We were struggling, yes, the competition was real. But were we financially insolvent, as the article claimed? No, we were on the ropes, but we weren't down. We had enough cash flow to survive for at least another 6 months, maybe longer if we tightened our belts. The article wasn't just a rumor, it was a targeted strike. It created a panic that became a self-fulfilling prophecy. But why? Why would they kill my Busans? The answer hit me with the force of a physical blow. It wasn't about me, it was never about me. My small, struggling restaurant was a distraction, a sacrifice. I leaned back in my chair, the screen blurring in front of me. Arthur and Caleb needed a story. They were about to take a huge, embarrassing financial loss on their tech investment. How could Arthur, the city councilman and business guru, explain that? He couldn't. It would tarnish his perfect image. So he created a different story, a family story. The tragic but relatable tale of his passionate but unstable son-in-law whose business failed. My failure, publicly and sympathetically displayed, would become the talk of the town. It would be a smokescreen, a financial red herring to draw attention away from the Vances' much larger, much more humiliating investment disaster. They weren't just protecting their money, they were protecting their name. The loan Arthur gave me wasn't an act of generosity, it was a trap. It entangled our finances, making my business a part of the family portfolio. It gave him a front-row seat to my struggles and the justification to speak about them publicly. He hadn't tried to help me succeed, he had positioned me to fail in the most convenient way possible. The whispers weren't just in the ledgers anymore. They were screaming in my head. The betrayal was so much deeper than I could have ever imagined. Chloe, did she know? Was she a part of it? The printed emails in the folder felt like a clue she had left, either intentionally or subconsciously, a breadcrumb trail she couldn't bring herself to explain out loud. I looked at the cold, hard numbers on the screen and the smooth, calculated words in Caleb's emails. This wasn't just a business failure. It was an execution, and I finally knew who had signed the order. The initial shock gave way to a cold, hard resolve. The grief for my restaurant was replaced by a burning need for the full truth. Believing something and proving it were two very different things. Arthur Vance was a master of public image, insulated by layers of wealth, influence, and plausible deniability. To confront him, I needed more than just a theory, I needed irrefutable evidence. My first call was to David Chen. David was an old friend, a forensic accountant I had known since high school. He was sharp, discreet, and had a bulldog's tenacity when it came to numbers. We met at a nondescript coffee shop on the edge of town, far from the downtown circles where the Vances held court. I laid out everything I had found, the emails from Caleb, the prospectus for Synapse Dynamics, the public filings showing the Vance investment, and the timeline of my restaurant's decline. David listened intently, his fingers steepled, his eyes scanning the documents I pushed across the table. He didn't interrupt. When I finished, he was silent for a long moment, a grim look on his face. "Liam," he said finally, his voice low, "this is ugly. If you're right, they didn't just let your business die. They smothered it with a pillow." "I know," I said, "but can we prove it? Can we connect the dots in a way that no one can deny?" "Maybe," he said, tapping a finger on the Synapse prospectus. "Arthur is smart. He wouldn't have left a clean paper trail, but Caleb, you described him as arrogant, desperate to prove himself. Those guys get sloppy. They brag. They use emails when they should use the phone. Let me take these. I'll start digging into the holding company, see what else it's tied to, and I'll see if I can find out more about the internal state of Synapse when they invested." While David worked his magic on the financial side, I had to deal with the personal fallout. I had to confront Chloe. I couldn't move forward without knowing what she knew. I chose my moment carefully, waiting for a quiet evening at home. The tension between us was a constant, suffocating presence. I laid the printed emails on the coffee table between us. "Chloe, I found these in the restaurant files. Why did you print them?" She stared at the papers, her face losing all its color. She wouldn't meet my eyes. I don't remember," she stammered. "Don't lie to me," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "Not anymore. Did you know? Did you know Caleb and your father were setting me up?" The tears came then, silent at first, then turning into racking sobs. "No, not like that," she finally choked out. "I didn't know they were going to destroy you. Caleb came to me saying he had this great opportunity. He said Dad was backing it and that if we got in, we could make enough money to solve all of the hearth's problems. He made it sound like they were trying to help us by getting me to gamble our emergency funds on a failing tech company," I countered. "I didn't know it was failing," she cried. "Caleb swore it was the next big thing, he said. He said you were too cautious, too old school, and that's why the restaurant was struggling." I believed him. I thought he was trying to help his big sister. I printed the emails because I was going to try and convince you again, but then I felt guilty. It felt wrong, going behind your back, so I just stuck them in the folder and tried to forget about it. I watched her, my heart a knot of anger and pity. She had been a pawn, manipulated by her brother's charm and her deep-seated desire for her family's approval. "And the article?" I asked. "The one that killed us, what about that?" She shook her head, wiping her eyes. "I don't know anything about that, Liam, I swear, but after Dad's speech at the gala, I started to wonder. I asked him about it, and he just said it was unfortunate but that sometimes tough decisions are necessary for the greater good of the family. He made me feel like I was crazy for even questioning him." I believed her, or at least I believed that she hadn't been a willing participant in the conspiracy. She was guilty of weakness, of a blind spot where her family was concerned, but she wasn't malicious. The discovery, however, shattered what little was left of our connection. She had chosen, consciously or not, to trust them over me. The foundation of our marriage was cracked beyond repair. A week later, David called me. "I've got something," he said. "It's not a smoking gun, but it's a whole lot of bullets." We met again. David had managed to get his hands on an internal quarterly report for Synapse Dynamics, leaked by a disgruntled former employee. The report, dated just 1 week before Arthur offered me the generous loan, was catastrophic. It detailed massive cash flow problems, critical product delays, and a high probability of insolvency within the next 6 months. "Arthur and Caleb knew," David said, his voice grim. "They knew they had invested in a sinking ship. Your father-in-law wasn't giving you a loan to help you, he was establishing a narrative. He was pre-writing the story of the unstable son-in-law whose business failed, all while knowing his own multi-million-dollar investment was about to go up in smoke." The next piece of the puzzle was even more damning. David had traced the ownership of the local newspaper that published the anonymous article. Last year, the paper had been struggling financially. It was acquired by a media investment group. After some digging, David found that the investment group was managed by a firm where Arthur Vance was a silent partner. He didn't own the paper, not directly, but he had significant influence. He had the power to plant a story. "It's circumstantial," David warned. "But you put it all together. The timing of the loan, the internal report from Synapse, Arthur's connection to the newspaper, and then the speech at the gala. A good lawyer could have a field day with this." The final piece came from a source I never expected. I reached out to a former journalist I knew, someone who had written a glowing review of the Hearth in its heyday. I told him a sanitized version of the story, that I suspected a competitor had planted the story to drive me out of business. I asked him if he could find out who the reporter was on the original story. The byline was a generic staff writer. He called me back 2 days later. "It's a weird one, Liam," he said. The original draft of that story wasn't written by a reporter. It was submitted to the editor as a press release from a PR firm, a firm called Vanguard Communications. I felt a chill run down my spine. I knew that name. Vanguard Communications was the public relations firm that handled all of Arthur Vance's real estate and political campaigns. There it was, the direct link. Arthur hadn't just used his influence, he had used his own personal PR machine to write my restaurant's obituary. They had crafted the lie and had the paper publish it as news. I thanked the journalist and hung up the phone. I sat in silence, the evidence laid out before me on my desk. The money trail was clear, the motivation was clear, the method was clear. This was a story of staggering betrayal of a powerful man willing to sacrifice his own daughter's husband to protect his pride and his public image. The shame he had piled on me was a carefully constructed lie. And now I had the truth. The only question left was what I was going to do with it. Vengeance is a dish best served cold, but I'm a chef. I believe in preparation, in precision, in transforming simple ingredients into something unforgettable. My first instinct was to go public, to hand everything to a real journalist and watch the Vance empire burn. But that wasn't enough. Arthur had humiliated me publicly, using a grand stage to assassinate my character. A newspaper article would be a fleeting scandal. I needed to reclaim my story on my own terms in a way he would never see coming. I needed a confrontation, not in a courtroom or a newsroom, but in my arena, the kitchen. The plan began to form piece by piece. I called it the Phoenix Project. It was about rising from the ashes, but it was also about fire and transformation. I wasn't just going to expose Arthur, I was going to rebuild myself in the process, proving him wrong about every single thing he had said about me. First, I dealt with my personal life. I told Chloe everything I had found. I laid out the evidence, the leaked report, the newspaper connection, the PR firm. She listened, her face a mask of horror and disbelief. For the first time, she saw her father not as a pillar of strength but as a ruthless manipulator. The revelation broke her. Our marriage was already over, but this was the final formal end. We agreed to separate. It was painful but necessary. I couldn't rebuild my life while tied to the family that had tried to demolish it. Next, I needed capital. My name was mud in the local banking scene. No one would give me a loan, so I turned to the only person I knew I could trust completely, David Chen. I presented him with my plan, not just the part about exposing Arthur, but the business plan that came with it. David looked at me, a slow smile spreading across his face. "This is insane, Liam," he said. "I love it. You're not just going after him, you're building something better. Count me in." David couldn't fund the whole thing, but he invested a significant amount of his own money, and more importantly, he leveraged his network. He introduced me to a small group of private investors, people who valued talent over town gossip. To them, I didn't pitch a story of revenge. I pitched a story of resilience. I showed them my original business plan for the hearth, its 5 years of success, and then I showed them the manufactured nature of its downfall. I presented a new concept, a smaller, more intimate dining experience. A single tasting menu showcasing the absolute best of what I could do, a place built on integrity. They were intrigued by the story, but they invested in the numbers. David had helped me prepare a rock-solid business plan. Within a month, I had the funding I needed. I found the perfect location. It was a small, overlooked space in a part of town that was just starting to gentrify, far from Arthur Vance's downtown kingdom. It was modest, but it had good bones. I spent the next 3 months working day and night, doing much of the renovation myself with the help of a few loyal friends from my old crew. I laid tile, sanded wood, and painted walls. Every swing of the hammer felt like I was breaking down the prison of shame Arthur had built around me. Every new coat of paint felt like I was erasing the stain he had left on my name. While the physical space was coming together, I worked on the other, more delicate part of my plan, the unveiling. I started a ghost social media campaign under the name Phoenix. It was all teasers, close-up shots of beautiful ingredients, short videos of complex cooking techniques, cryptic quotes about second chances and the nature of truth. It generated a small but intense buzz among the city's foodies. No one knew who was behind it. The final piece was the guest list for opening night. This was the most critical part. It would be a small, private dinner, not a grand opening. I used my connections and David's to curate the perfect audience. The list included the city's most influential food blogger, the lifestyle editor from the very newspaper that had published my restaurant's obituary, and a few well-known local business owners who respected success and hated deceit. And of course, the guests of honor, Arthur and Caleb Vance. Getting them there was the easy part. I had Chloe do it. In one of her final, strained conversations with her father, she told him that her estranged husband was trying to get back on his feet with a small catering project and that as a gesture of goodwill, he wanted to host a private dinner for the family to clear the air. He wants to apologize, Dad, she told him, the lie tasting like ash in her mouth. Arthur, ever the magnanimous patriarch, readily agreed. To him, this was the perfect final chapter to his story. The failed son-in-law, humbled and broken, coming back to beg for forgiveness. It was an opportunity for him to display his grace and cement his victory. He likely imagined a pathetic, sad little dinner where I would serve him a slice of humble pie, and he would pat me on the head and tell me all was forgiven. He told Chloe he would be delighted to attend and would bring Caleb along. They had no idea they weren't coming for an apology. They were coming for a reckoning. The night before the dinner, I stood alone in my new restaurant. I called it Provenance. The name meant the place of origin or earliest known history of something. It was about a return to the source, to honesty, to the truth of where things come from, whether it's an ingredient on a plate or a story that has been twisted into a lie. The space was beautiful, intimate, and warm with soft light. And a small, open kitchen that was the centerpiece of the room. Everything was ready. The menus were printed. The ingredients were prepped. The evidence was compiled into neat, elegant folders, one for each guest. I took a deep breath, the air filled with the scent of fresh paint and possibility. The shame that had haunted me for months was gone, burned away by the fire of my new purpose. I was no longer the victim in Arthur Vance's story. I was the author of my own. And tomorrow night, everyone, especially Arthur, was going to hear it. The evening of the dinner, a crisp autumn air settled over the city. Inside Provenance, the atmosphere was one of quiet anticipation. The tables were set with minimalist elegance. My small team, a sous chef and one server, both old loyalists from the hearth, moved with practiced, silent efficiency. I was in the kitchen, but I could see the entire dining room. It was my stage. The guests arrived. The food blogger Amelia, known for her sharp wit and even sharper palate. The newspaper editor, a man named Marcus who had been at the helm when the fatal article ran. The other business owners, people whose opinions mattered in this city. They mingled, intrigued by the mystery of the new restaurant. Then Arthur and Caleb arrived. Arthur walked in with his signature confident stride, a benevolent smile fixed on his face. He looked around the small space, a flicker of something pity, amusement, in his eyes. Caleb followed, looking bored and slightly annoyed, as if he were doing his father a favor. "Liam, my boy," Arthur boomed, extending a hand. "This is cozy, a commendable effort to get back on your feet." "Thank you for coming, Arthur," I said, my voice even and calm. I shook his hand. It felt cold. "Caleb," I nodded to him. He gave me a curt, dismissive nod in return. I directed them to the main table where I had seated them at the head. Once everyone was settled, I stood before them. "Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Provenance," I began. "Thank you for being here for our very first service. This evening is about stories. Every dish I'll be serving you has a story about its ingredients, its history, its provenance. But before we begin with the food, I'd like to share a different kind of story. The story of why we're all here tonight." Arthur shifted in his seat, his smile tightening slightly. He expected an apology, a story of my failure. I started by talking about the hearth. I spoke of the passion, the success, the community we built. I acknowledged the struggles, the increasing competition. Then my tone shifted. "A business like a life can be vulnerable," I said, my eyes locking onto Arthur's. "Sometimes it dies of natural causes, and sometimes it's poisoned." A nervous silence fell over the room. I saw the blogger, Amelia, discreetly turn on the voice recorder on her phone. "The poison in my case," I continued, "was a story. A false story planted in the media that claimed my restaurant was insolvent when it was still fighting to survive." I looked directly at Marcus, the editor. "A story that ran in your newspaper, Marcus, not from a journalist, but as a press release from a PR firm. A firm called Vanguard Communications." Marcus's eyes widened. He knew that name. Everyone did. It was Arthur's firm. Arthur's face had gone rigid. The benevolent mask was gone, replaced by a cold, hard fury. Caleb looked confused, glancing nervously between me and his father. My server on my cue placed a single, elegantly bound folder in front of each guest. "Inside those folders, you will find the evidence for the story I'm telling," I said. "You will find the press release, documentation of Vanguard's client list, and proof of my restaurant's actual financial state at the time the article was published." I let them open the folders and scan the first few pages. Then I moved to the next chapter of my story. Why would someone do this? To create a distraction, a smokescreen, to hide a much bigger, more embarrassing failure. I then laid out the story of Synapse Dynamics. I explained Caleb's reckless investment and how he convinced his father to join him. I talked about the catastrophic internal report they received, proving they knew the company was a dud. My server moved again, placing the second course of evidence in their folders. You will now find a copy of that leaked report, I said, my voice ringing with clarity. Dated 1 week before Arthur Vance so graciously offered me a personal loan, entangling me in his family's finances. Arthur was pale, his knuckles white where he gripped the table. "This is slander," he hissed, his voice low and venomous. "An absurd fantasy from a desperate failed man." "Is it?" I countered, my voice never rising. "Desperate men do desperate things, Arthur, like using a son-in-law's small, honorable failure to cover for their own multi-million-dollar catastrophe. You didn't just need my business to fail, you need everyone to be talking about it, which brings us to the final act." I described the scene at the charity gala. I repeated his words, the ones that had been seared into my memory. Instability, emotional decisions, you cannot protect someone from themselves. "You stood on a stage," I said, my voice thick with the emotion I had suppressed for so long, "and you used my pain, my public humiliation, as a shield to protect your own pride. You assassinated my character to save your reputation." The room was deathly quiet. All eyes were on Arthur Vance, the community leader, the pillar of integrity. He looked trapped, his charisma utterly stripped away, revealing the cold, ruthless man underneath. Caleb was a wreck. He was stammering, looking at his father for a rescue that wasn't coming. "Dad, tell them it's not true." But Arthur said nothing. He simply stared at me with pure, undiluted hatred. I walked back into the kitchen. My hands were shaking, but not from fear. It was adrenaline, it was release. My team looked at me with awe. A moment later, my server came in. "They're just sitting there," he whispered. "The blogger and the editor are reading every single page. Arthur and Caleb look like statues." I took a deep breath. "Serve the first course," I said. The first dish was an oyster served on a bed of crushed ice. "This dish is called the murmur," my server explained to the stunned table. "A single perfect oyster. It represents a whisper, a rumor, small, easily swallowed, but it can contain either a pearl of truth or a sickness that can poison everything." For the next hour, I sent out a 5-course meal. Each dish was a metaphor for the story: a deconstructed soup called smokescreen, a main course of slow-cooked lamb, tender and sacrificed, which I called the scapegoat. Each plate was exquisite, a testament to my skill and artistry, the very things Arthur had tried to frame as a weakness. It was the best food I had ever cooked in my life. Finally, after the dessert, a dark chocolate sphere that melted when a warm caramel sauce was poured over it, revealing a bitter cherry inside called the unveiling. I stepped out again. Arthur and Caleb were gone. They had slipped out during the main course, but everyone else remained. Amelia, the blogger, looked up at me, her eyes wide. "This is the most incredible story I have ever heard," she said. "And this is, without a doubt, the best meal I have had in this city in a decade." Marcus, the editor, stood up. He walked over to me and extended his hand. "Mr. Turner," he said, his voice heavy with regret, "my paper owes you an apology and a front-page story. If you'll let us, we'd like to be the ones to tell the truth." I shook his hand. I had won, not by shouting or screaming, but by doing what I do best. I had taken the bitterest ingredients and transformed them into a masterpiece. I had reclaimed my narrative, not just with facts and figures in a folder, but with every plate I served. The shame was gone, replaced by the quiet, powerful satisfaction of justice served with precision and grace. The story broke the next morning. Marcus was true to his word. The headline on the front page of the city paper read, "The VANCE Deception, How a Respected Leader Sacrificed a Family Member to Hide a Financial Disaster." Amelia's blog post went viral, a breathtakingly detailed account of the unveiling dinner, complete with photos of the food and descriptions of each metaphorical course. She called it a masterclass in culinary justice. My phone didn't stop ringing. The story was everywhere. The fallout for the Vance family was swift and catastrophic. Arthur's carefully constructed image shattered overnight. He was forced to resign from the city council, citing personal reasons. The board of the city foundation asked for his resignation as chairman. His business partners grew distant, and whispers of audits and investigations began to circulate. The man who had been the king of the city became a pariah, confined to his large, empty mansion, the curtains drawn. Caleb fared no better. The story destroyed his credibility as an investment advisor. His clients pulled their money, and the firm he worked for fired him. Last I heard, he was facing a professional conduct review that would likely strip him of his licenses. In his desperate attempt to fly, his father hadn't just clipped his wings, he had broken them. My own life, in contrast, began to bloom. Provenance was an instant, runaway success. It became the most sought-after reservation in the city, not just because of the scandal, but because of the food. People came for the story, but they came back for the cooking. I had proven in the most public way imaginable that my passion wasn't a liability, it was my greatest strength. I was no longer the unstable failure. I was the chef who had turned his own ruin into art. I hired back my old sous chef and my best server permanently. We were a small, tight-knit team, bound by loyalty and a shared sense of purpose. The work was still hard, the hours still long, but the oppressive weight of impending failure was gone. In its place was the light, clean feeling of creating something honest and true. Chloe filed for divorce a few weeks after the dinner. We met one last time to sign the papers. She looked tired but peaceful. "I'm sorry, Liam," she said, her voice quiet, "for everything, for not seeing it, for not being strong enough to stand with you." "I'm sorry too," I said, and I meant it. I was sorry for the dream we had lost. "What will you do now?" "I'm leaving," she said, "moving to the coast. I need to get away from his name, his shadow. I need to find out who I am without it." I wished her well. There was no anger left, only a sad sort of peace. We were two people who had been shipwrecked by the same storm, and we were finally swimming for different shores. A few months later, David and I were having a drink at the bar in Providence after a busy Saturday night service. He raised his glass. "To the Phoenix Project," he said, a wide grin on his face. "To Providence," I corrected him, smiling. "The project is over." "Is it?" he asked. "I don't know, it feels like you're just getting started." He was right. Exposing Arthur wasn't the end of the story, it was the beginning of mine. The revenge was satisfying, yes, but what came after was so much better. It was the freedom to build a life and a business on my own terms, defined not by a family name or public perception, but by my own integrity and hard work. Sometimes people who have heard the story ask me if I regret what I did, if destroying my wife's family was worth it. I tell them they're asking the wrong question. I didn't destroy the Vance family, they destroyed themselves with their own lies and pride. I just turned on the lights so everyone could see the rot that was already there. My only regret is that I didn't see it sooner. Tonight the restaurant is full. The sound of happy conversation and the clinking of glasses fills the room. Through the pass from my kitchen, I can see every table. I see couples on first dates, old friends celebrating birthdays, people connecting over a shared meal. I built this, not from the ashes of revenge, but from a deep, abiding belief in the power of truth. My name is Liam Turner, and I am a chef. I am not defined by my failure nor by my victory. I am defined by the table I set, the food I create, and the honest story I now get to tell, one plate at a time.